All right, so we're talking about what to do if you have chicken legs. Regardless, maybe you have a great upper body, maybe you don't, or maybe you're just looking to gain mass in your lower body. And that's something that I struggled with kind of throughout my earlier lifting career and just growing was that my legs wouldn't grow no matter how many times I thought I would. I'm squatting, I'm doing leg presses, I'm doing, bodybuilding magazine workouts, all of this stuff, and they just didn't seem to grow. And in this episode, I'm going to cover with you 8 reasons why you or somebody who has chicken legs might be struggling with this issue and how to combat that, right? So let's dive into the 8 reasons why you might have chicken legs, or you might actually, even though you're training them and you're doing everything you can, you're just not getting the leg growth you want, or maybe you have great legs and you just want to get them bigger. So the first one, insufficient overall training volume. Let me say that again. In short, it basically means you're not getting enough work specifically to your quads and hamstrings throughout the course of the week to make it happen, right? So when I'm looking at that, I'm really trying to think about hitting my big compound movements in a way that I can track my overall sets throughout the week and make sure that I'm getting the adequate volume week to week. And as my body starts to adjust, maybe I have to increase that volume until I kind of get towards the upper limit, and then I have to recalibrate things. So when I'm looking at my quads, and I really like the Renaissance periodization hypertrophy manuals here, and they actually just released an ebook, so you guys could use, the code that I have there, J2Fit. You could go online, check it out. But they have an ebook there. And they also have the Training Hub Central. It's just online content, and it basically goes through all the muscle groups, and based on the research that they've collected, based on the research that's out there and the reviews that they've done, they give you kind of ranges that you can stick and stay within. So for quadriceps, I typically try to go between 14 and 18 total sets per week. And when I mean total sets, that is really main work sets. So it doesn't include warm-ups, right? Sometimes I may or may not include just leg extensions, kind of single leg work, but sometimes I will. But 14 to 18. And when I start out a mesocycle, maybe it's a 5-week training program, like my current one now, I kind of hang out towards the lower end of that. And over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, I might go 14 total sets. Second week might be 14 total sets. Maybe it's a little heavier. The third week might be the same amount of weight, but I go to 15 total sets. And then, the next week, the fourth week might be 17 total sets. And throughout this whole period, I'm just tracking to make sure that, I'm having muscle soreness, I'm still getting recovery. Because if I get to a point where my performance is dropping and I'm increasing my training volume, maybe I don't need to go any more training volume because it might actually be too much for me, right? And that's kind of a typical thing when people are doing a bunch of volume, right? That's kind of the next thing is they're doing it too much, but they can actually impede recovery, which impedes growth. For hamstrings, the same concept, but maybe a little less because hamstrings are used a lot elsewhere. So I like about 12 to 15 direct hamstring work. So maybe that's coming from stiff leg deadlifts. I don't count conventional deadlifts, or even sometimes I don't count sumo deadlifts as hamstring when I'm going for actual growth. Maybe a deficit sumo I would. So a lot of that more specific hamstring work where I feel that local muscle fatigue. The next thing is training frequency. Now, to go along with the overall training volume of things, training frequency is important because right, we all know the leg day, right? We have one day we murder ourselves with legs. Maybe we're doing all 18 sets of quads, followed up with 15 sets of hamstrings. We got a total of 33 sets of lower body. That's a hellish workout, and to be quite frank, that's probably a lot of trash volume. So typically when I'm putting together workouts, I try to keep most of my lower body just because the loading's much higher. It's a lot more stress. I like to keep my total volume, right, between 15, 20, maybe low 20 tops, right? So maybe that's, 12 sets of quads and then, 6 sets of hamstrings, split up between a variety of exercises. And that might be that day one. Well, how do I get the rest of my volume? I don't add it all on day one. I have another day where I do it, right? So I think optimal training frequency for somebody who has chicken legs is not to do more in one day, but to do more quality work across the week. So maybe split up what you would do in one day, make sure your volumes are correct, but do 2 days or maybe 3 days. And the great thing about increasing your training frequency is you aren't debilitatingly sore because you murdered your legs in one day, but also you'll be able to generally work with a little heavier loading, which obviously, some movements we don't have to go crazy heavy, but we have to have some stimulus. We have to have some load. But then also, more importantly, is we can allow ourselves to recover. So when that muscle gives out and we still have 10 more sets we want to do, right, we're not just murdering our joints and ligaments. And that's something that to be important and to be a focus when we're, training a lot more frequently, you're advancing in your programming, or you're just getting older. So that's something that, has really made a big difference is training a muscle group 2 times a week. I find 2 to be the best, but sometimes even 3. And it might even be that third day, it's just 4 sets of leg press. Like that might be it. Even though maybe you're doing, arms and shoulders and you finish off with some leg extensions. You get your volume in. Another one here, poor exercise selection. So, we all know if we want to get bigger legs, sure. We know the kind of the big things here. But there's a lot of people that spend a lot of time doing exercises that might not actually be promoting the best growth for them, right? And I know there's a lot of things out there that, people like doing these flashy, functional exercises and that, but there has to be exercise that allow you to add loading, right? I'm not saying you have to max out every time, but you should be, working with substantially heavy weight, right? Heavy is relative, but, with a weight that, if you're looking to squat, right, and you're doing high rep squats, and sometimes if you're feeling your back going out, right, obviously look at your technique, but you might just be doing too much volume and you're starting to blow out, your smaller muscle groups, and you're not really challenging the lower body because they're stronger than what that is. So sometimes some people respond a little better to, rep ranges of 5 to 10 versus, 12 to 15. You can kind of vary it based on your cycle. You can experiment. But I think it's important that we want to have exercise selection where we're focusing on the compound lifts, really building around that. So that would be, your back squats, your front squats, your hack squats, your leg press. We'll get to all that later. And then maybe focusing on the unilateral stuff, but you can kind of mix all that in there. So making sure that we're really focusing on good exercises. Next one, not training in the full range of motion. Now, before we go too deep into this, right, we have that whole camp of like squat ass to grass or don't squat at all. Anything above ass to grass is wasting your time. There is some merit in terms of we want to have maximal muscular tension, and we can get that via a loaded stretch, right? So if it's a squat and we're trying to get the quads, obviously the quads move at the knee joint, right? So the depth in a squat, if somebody just gets super deep because they're pushing their hips back and they're leaning forward and that's deep, well, maybe the squat was deep, but the knee flexion wasn't deep, and now we're not hitting our quads, we're just, gearing up our back on our hips. So that ass to grass squat might not actually be beneficial to what we're trying to do. So it's important to understand that we want to get full range of motion at the target joint that we're trying to hit. So if it's a quadricep focused squat, right, like a high bar back squat or a front squat or hack squat or even leg press, we want to focus on knee flexion. And the amount of knee flexion is going to be really come down to comfort, and if there's pain in something, then we don't need to go any deeper. You probably should address that first. But really just try to get that deep stretch. Feel that tension, and I'm just using the quad here because that's example purposes. But say you're doing a back squat and you're sitting down there and you're feeling your quads getting roasted, and maybe you're like an inch above parallel. An inch below parallel. If you could get a little deeper and put a little more stretch on that quad, obviously your loading might not be as high. That might help you out there, and then you can kind of build strength from there. So I think it's important, if we're looking at stiff leg deadlifts, if we want to hit the hamstrings, you should feel the hamstrings getting loaded up, because if you're not, then you're loading other things up even though you're doing an exercise, and that's counterintuitive, right? So with muscle growth, and this is not exclusive to this is different than strength development, because strength development, I don't want you thinking about where you feel in the muscle, right? Muscle growth, we have to be focusing on, if you want to do a stiff leg deadlift, but you're trying to, get those hamstrings to grow, you should be feeling those hamstrings by after that first or second set, already starting to kind of talk to you. And this kind of goes into the next thing, which is training too heavy, right? Typically when people train too heavy, they cut their range of motion, right? They're not focusing anymore on the joint action and the muscle stretch. They're just trying to move weight. which can lead to them, maybe their knees are hurting, their joints get hurt over time, they can't train as frequently. So all those can really just boil down to sometimes you're training too heavy, right? So if we can just drop the loading, right? And it doesn't mean the workouts are going to be easier, because there's all kinds of variables we can change here. We can have you go deeper into a squat. If anybody who's done a half squat and then went full depth, it's a completely different world down there, right? And most people don't want to live down there because it sucks. It's a horrible place to be, but it's a great place to be if you're looking to gain powerful quads and hamstrings in the full range of motion. So that's something you want to think about. Personally, I like most of my compound lifts. So I'm looking for strength and size. I like to stay in that like 5 to 8 rep range. And that's obviously, I'm not in a strength phase. Obviously, you will get stronger. At least you'll increase the raw material to get stronger and express that strength later on. But I like doing a lot of my compound lifts and my squats, my deadlifts, my stiff leg deadlifts, RDLs. Remember, I don't count conventional for hamstring. I like doing that in that 5 to 8 rep range with some controlled eccentrics, making sure that I'm really using good loading, but I'm acquiring muscular fatigue and not just overall fatigue without a lot of muscle loading and volume. The next one here is you're training too light. This is something I see a lot when I get a lot of beginner clients, remote clients, maybe who are struggling to gain mass, maybe they're hard gainers, is they're just not training heavy enough. And again, heavy is relative, but if you are using, if you get to the end of a set, maybe we're doing a set of 10, and you get to the end of the set and, if your life depended on it, you could have gotten more than 5 reps or maybe even more than 3 reps. Really, I like keeping at least 3 reps in the tank, if not maybe 2 or 3 reps in the tank, no more than that. You're probably training too light. So whatever your rep range would be, if it's a 20 rep squat, that doesn't mean it's an easy, super light squat. It's light relative to your 10 rep, but by the end of that last 20 rep squat, you should be able to do, 2 or 3 more at most. If you could sit there and do another 10, then it's too light to begin with, and your loading is not properly going to induce a stimulus that you want. So if, this is kind of a challenge I see with people who work out from home, all that stuff. I have people who want to get bigger legs and, they squat 315, but they only have body weight. If you can do something, more than 25 reps to fatigue, then it's probably you're going to be limited by loading, and you're just going to acquire a lot of fatigue in general just because you're doing a lot of volume. So you're going to feel tired, but you're not actually going to get a lot of muscular stimulus and that anabolic process to drive that growth. So that's something to think about. Next one, not eating enough. This is like really for anybody out there who is having issues gaining muscle mass and size, is you need to eat more, right? It's so cliche, but like somebody who tells me that they just can't gain weight or they can't gain muscle despite them, they're eating, I'm sorry, buddy, you're just not eating enough. Like that's, at the end of the day, it's like if you want to buy something but you don't have enough money, or you say, I just can't afford it, I can't do this and that, well, what do you got to do? You got to make more money. You got to eat more. You got to eat more food, put more nutrients in your body, because the more food you can slowly ramp up, and that's why I like the RP diet, back to plugging that, and the diet app is because it ramps you up. So somebody asked me the other day, Mike, how much you eat in your bulk? I was eating like 800 grams of carbs. I was eating over 5,000 calories every single day, but that was my week 14 numbers. When I started, I wasn't eating that much, right? And each week I was increasing 200, 300 calories just to be able to keep myself on track to build my appetite up, because I couldn't do that week 1, and nor can most people. So that's why you have to have a better plan, and you have to eat more food. And then last one here, this is a big one. I actually suffer from this. I know a lot of people suffer from this, and maybe this comes with people are afraid to gain body fat during a period where they're trying to gain mass. And this is really big for like people who struggle with the chicken legs or the hard gainers, is they can't gain mass because they can't eat the food, but they don't want to eat all the food because they don't want to, gain body fat. So in order to make themselves feel better about that, they start pounding away. They start doing cardio. So they're eating more, but they're burning more in cardio, and it's kind of like a net negative balance. So excessive high impact cardio specifically, but I would really just expand that to excessive cardio, and putting a lot of wear and tear on the legs. And that's why a lot of bodybuilders during bulk, there is a benefit to doing like slow, steady state, low impact cardio for heart health, right? All that stuff. If you're relatively healthy, you're young, You could do that if you wanted to. But and I guess, there is benefit in terms of if you're looking to do that, it's obviously going to increase your caloric expenditure. It's going to force you to eat more. You could set your metabolic base rate higher, so then, during a cut phase, it'll be a little easier. So I agree, you could do some, but for most people who are doing a lot of cardio and trying to gain leg mass and size, that's probably counterintuitive work. So I would really cut it back. I would stick to very slow, like low impacts, maybe incline walking, maybe elliptical. I know it's not as sexy as going out and, sprinting, going out and, doing all kinds of running and jogging 5Ks and doing Murph and this and that. And all those are great. Those are all great. But if you're struggling to put on leg mass and size, you only have a certain amount of energy that you can put to that, because everything else you do outside of that is going to impede recovery.